value of new experiences for guests. Frett is a Vice President of Experience and Engagement at Shermer. He has 20 plus years of experience at Powerhouse Digital Shops like Popular Front and Tom. And on the client side of Target and Intel, he has spearheaded interactive initiatives at Fortune 500 clients that include H&R Block, 3M, Deluxe, General Mills, Ecolab, Hasbro, and Universal. Kenneth Yueh is a user experience designer at Convey and adjunct user experience instructor at the Miami Ad School. He's previously a senior user experience designer at Martin Climate and an information architect at Thomson Reuters. And lastly, Zack Naylor is a principal UX designer at Nerdery, an active member of the UX community. His credits include Nerdery webinars and blog posts. He's spoken at many WebCon, Pittsburgh Web Design Day, MNSPRA, and AIGA, etc. So welcome. Thanks so much for sharing your time. Again, when I kind of got into this around 2000, at least from my perspective, there really weren't that many titles out that I was all that aware of. I mean, there were things like web designer and webmaster seemed to be quite popular term, pretty general. Just titles could mean just about anything. And I started running into people who were calling themselves information designers, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And I actually took a class from one and went on to, kind of open my mind up to some other facets of the whole web design world. And of course, the usability experts that we used to follow. Back then, we kind of read up on people like Don Norman and Jacob Nielsen and Alan Cooper and those folks. Kind of looked at library sciences to kind of organize our sites and learn how to kind of do our site maps and divide up our organizational structures, and looked at other fields like architecture for organization and navigation. So, fast forward to 2014, you've got quite a few choices here. If you want to have a little fun with this, Nicole just did something that I found the other day too. It's hilarious. That's what we're done here, but it's called the UX generator, and it just kind of throws in different titles together. So, interaction design, I think we're all pretty familiar with that one. Information designers, I think, took on the architect title at some point in the process. Of course, we've always had visual designers. Content strategists is something a little bit new, I think. Usability specialists, well, that goes way back to the old CHI days of interactive hardware. Well, that's always kind of right, I guess. And of course, now global, we're getting into those types of titles. People are consultants, the leaders, senior, junior. Some are just pros. It's a little confusing. Chief Experience Officer. This is something I ran across the other day. I guess a few companies are so bought into UX these days that they actually establish these senior level kind of C-level titles. So not a whole lot of surprise to reach, but of course we're user researchers. This is one from my own company. It took forever for Wells to really kind of come up with any titles that I was aware of. At least there are people who get up their own running corporate marketing and really folks out in San Francisco to kind of get up and sell the client titles. This is a real title that's actually started to filter down even into the intranet or rivalry. That's a big thing, I think. I'm not entirely sure what the entire thing means, but it's a good sign. There's product designers. You kind of get into silly stuff. You go to job postings, I think you see this little point in the development world, but I had to throw a couple of these in from the UX generator. Gurus and ninjas and all that type. Black belts, crusaders, champions. So you get some pretty interesting titles. Chief scientists, that kind of stuff. And I went out and kind of looked around, prepare for this, and I'm a very visual person. I'm sure many of you you are. So I was looking for good diagrams and whatnot to try to explain all this. And I think the best one I've seen probably keeping Dan Safford with that we have. And I don't know, this is probably about 10 years old, and I put it out for a book. It kind of, I think it illustrates nicely all the kind of overlaps between some of the fields that have influenced some of and what we're now calling, I think, the user experience and sort of sphere, larger group. But at least to me, UX design is kind of it's a little vague, it's a little ambiguous, and it seems to be kind of sort of all-encompassing. So I was kind of surprised to see some of the things that he included. Architecture, I totally get sound design over there with all the content. And he's revised this diagram somewhat as well, so it gets a little busier here. But I thought, just to kind of leave these things up, and maybe we could kind of toss this out as a jumping off point. And maybe we just kind of start off down the line here about, all of you call yourselves, most of you at least identify yourselves as UX designers. So maybe one by one, what does that mean? How would you describe your job to your grandmother? Someone who doesn't really quite understand all this stuff. Just take it down the line here. Start with Zack.
Sure. At this point, I kind of regret sitting where I did. How I would describe it to my grandmother is really just saying, I'm designing things mostly in digital environments that make them as easy and as valuable as they can be for whoever is using them. There's a lot more baggage behind saying something like that when you're not talking to your grandmother.
Yeah, I think it would be similar, just making something as easy to use as possible. I think that especially talking to grandmother, that would be kind of the crux of it.
Yeah, I think I would, the only layer onto that is I would probably talk about, listening and finding out what people are needing or wanting in products that they either have or don't have yet, and then designing to make sure that they're really easy to use.
And I mean, the only kind of slight difference I would say, especially for grandma, would say is that I help those businesses understand what their stories are, and tell them to their audiences in the right way that their audiences want to share. And that's what I was doing.
And in all honesty, I still tell my parents that I want computers, so. Embellishment here.
That's the easy answer.
Yeah.
That's the best answer.
I think getting back to web design actually solves a lot of that.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of gets that. So how do you describe yourself in maybe more of a peer or to a colleague? I mean, we all have our own kind of specialties and whatnot, but again, if you're a UX designer, I mean, it can mean so many different things. How about maybe a little bit more personal, what are your specialties and what do you take it with you there?
I regret it. Well, I mean, I think one of the aspects for UX that I think is interesting is there's many angles of UX, from research to design to strategy, even all the way through to prototype development and testing and whatnot. And the piece that I like to focus on is more the research and strategy side. What is it on an audience side that really, really matters to them? And how does that map to a business model? How does that map to what a business is trying to do, whether it's growth in APAC or a product launch next month in Canada or whatever the have you is how, so that, because I think a lot of times what is happening is just we get a lot of buzzwords out there. People say, oh, you're a company, and say, I need an app because I'm talking about apps. The right question is, what do you want to do and where's your business going and what are your audiences going? So I like to use UX from that standpoint from that research and strategy side. So I would not consider myself a UX designer. And I haven't really been anywhere near that sort of UX IE side for 5 years now, and more starting with what are we trying to solve here, and then helping more make teams.
Problem solver in general.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think when you look through that funny list, I've had a lot of different things. Like I've been in the strategy space, that's where I was before my current role. I've been in a customer experience design group. I've been a UX strategist and an information architect, business analyst. So what I would say now is that I would say we're in a problem-solving space, but we're using rapid prototyping to understand that problem space. To get quick feedback from customers, users. So, do I consider myself a user experience designer? Honestly, I feel very refreshed by the fact that when we do an intro, like where I am today, I said UX and research. There's no senior this, leader this. It's UX and research, and honestly, that feels great because I wear a lot of hats through the day, and it's helpful to kind of shed the specificity.
I hadn't thought of that way. I see it kind of as like a term. But yeah, it's kind of, it's refreshing too. It gives a little more buy-in, people kind of know what it means.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it seems like, like a lot of other trendy things, it's sort of slap, hey, we need good user experience, and people, I get on calls, conference calls with user experience, and I'm not sure if we're all on the same page about that, but at least it's, at least it's out there, and it's
Right.
my organization is they're starting to talk about it closer and closer to the top, which is,
Yep.
really,
That's a good point, though. You need to understand kind of the communication exchange of, oh, that means that you provide this within this context, right? What skills you bring into the project.
Yeah, for me currently, I'm more of a designer. I'd say I'd be the user experience designer, doing a lot of the wireframes and site maps and things like that. But that's kind of come a lot from, I've been doing a lot of consulting work as well recently, and a lot of times when you get into that role, the project is kind of defined in some ways already, and so they just need somebody to do a lot of that implementation. But then some of the prior roles I've had, with some research, a little bit more graphic design even. That was my original background in school. And so a lot of times it still depends on what the company is looking for, but you just kind of adapt to the situation.
so it sounds like you two want to have some roles.
For myself, I tend to live with research and strategy a lot as well, just by nature of my role currently. But beyond that, when I'm discussing it with a peer, I tend to have a conversation about it really transcend what we understand as UX design right now in the very creating of the thing type role. The reason why I say that is many of you probably read or even practiced these ideas of service design and really thought about things as ecosystems. More and more, I find myself talking to peers in that way, and I'm someone who plays some role in the creation of products, services, and touch points, and the meaningful connections between all those things. So if that's by understanding what those connections should be, if that's by defining the product itself and then designing that, I think a user experience designer, frankly, with the right skills, can play in any of those realms. There tends to be a natural fit if people are super strong. So maybe somebody like Kenneth Yueh is very good at creating products, digital products in some cases. But if you take a look at something like that, there are people who are good at creating products. People have experiences with interactions with maybe aren't even digital. They still can play in that world.
Yeah, actually, to add on, I would agree. I mean, it's like I look at that palette design opportunity now as segments. What are you strongest in, and what do you want to do? I mean, human factors and human interaction, and that's as much psychology and sociology as anything else. And it's fascinating field. You can go that direction if you want to go that direction and still be successful within the realm of UX overall.
And I think it's important to add too. We've always been victims of our own success in some ways because UX has become very popular. The problem is we've also pigeonholed ourselves to creating only digital things, something that has a screen. In reality, interaction design itself never really started in the digital world. So now, interestingly enough, probably a byproduct of where all these weird names and titles are coming from, is we're trying to work ourselves back out of that, closer to the roots, but then showing the connection of how that forms digital spaces as well.
The Internet of Things.
Sure.
Well, folks out there, how many of you have a UX title right? Anybody?
So I'd be curious, like how many designers, how many full-time What were some of the other ones that we didn't mention? That people have our
Information architects, NIAs.
research,
Researcher?
design research.
Design researcher?
DA.
Analysts.
There's a few.
Yeah.
Librarians.
Does anybody have a job? That's what it sounds like.
It's being modest.
Does anybody have probably a question too?
At any point, yeah, I mean, I kind of was hoping we could just kind of throw things out there as a roll, and then have further questions in mind, but please.
I saw some nodding heads in the back, some of the stuff this panel was discussing. I mean, someone's got questions, I know. Yeah, here we go.
Are there any technical skills that are sort of universally required or recognized as something expected of a UX designer? Specific software or that sort of thing?
University?
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting time from a tools perspective. I mean, there's probably, in the 15 years that I've been in the space, there's more tools and more options than ever before. It used to be, you had to know video, or you had to know omnigraphical, or whatever it was, and there are so many ways to draw boxes and lines and prototype things. It's really cool, and it's a fun time to be able to try them all out.
Yeah.
And I think as far as instead of thinking about it as what specific things do I need to know, as I would say it's more about honing the ability to learn all along the way. Because I mean, I started doing this in '97, and we did wireframes in PowerPoint, and that's a ridiculous thing to say at this point in time. But Visio and Omnigraph didn't exist. And then again, it's like we're talking about very, very basic monitors at that point in time. 2005, everyone was making huge stuff in Flash because it was cool. Now it's all about mobile. It's like everything changes every 3 or 4 years. So I wouldn't think about it as just definitively know this. It's like how to know this now, and 2 years from now, how to read up on whatever's next. Because it's changing again.
You're showing a lot for sure. What about, I mean, I think, what about the idea about UX heuristics? Who's really heuristics? Someplace to store it. It's, especially in the job where I've been, where it's been kind of dearth of UX practitioners to work with, and there's no time allotted for it. It's often kind of afterthoughts. At the very least, kind of understanding the principles. And, those haven't changed. Some things that Norman Cooper and those guys were worrying about.
That question is actually, that's good. I have a related response to that question, and also the one that
Nielsen, definitely, it's not controversial, it's one to make fun of, but it's definitely done a lot of important work and had important influence. There's Don Norman now works with him, it's in really influential books, things like creative things, all about the doorknobs and the affordances and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of those sort of basics. John Cooper, others. Yep, okay. Mr. BB. Doing that stuff, good grounding that, I think, is and the ability to solve problems and stuff. And the tools are just going to come and go. From my point of view, Photoshop and Reader, or whatever you can do to crank things out, mostly visually.
The one response I had to your question earlier too, kind of in addition to, I think what everybody else said so far, when I'm looking at, just as an example, someone is interviewing, right, and I'm asking them questions about poly design, I'm actually the least concerned about the tools they use. I'm more concerned about their understanding of design, and first of all, their philosophy behind why they do what they do, and then how they articulate that, right? So if you consider what some of the other people said, it's really about getting an understanding of the people you are serving, right? And that's through research, and all the things. And then understanding what the business is trying to accomplish. And the way I usually talk about that is, so on one side you have this is what business organizations are trying to do, and this is what people want or need. And they're never completely overlapping. So So I would say outside of tools, the real key is understanding the means to finding where there is overlap and saying, okay, we know how to articulate the design in that way. Know what tool you use to do that. To the point is, it's going to change next week anyway. So it's really a solid foundation of understanding why you're doing it, not necessarily doing it.
But I would say for tools, like the one tool I'd like to see people use more is just a whiteboard. Versus the technology always changes, but it's not just putting things up on the whiteboard though, it's kind of figuring out how to communicate through the information you're putting up there. You can really tell how a person thinks when they're out there putting their ideas out there.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's something I thought a lot about from last year, and actually, taking steps to go to sketch camp and really focus on improving not my illustration skills, but my drawing skills. I wasn't a designer, as a trade, so I think everyone can benefit from that, and I think we should, try not to be afraid of being the person that gets up at the whiteboard and, does the ecosystem drawing, right? That's part of what we kind of bring to the table. So I would say definitely, picking up strong drawing skills too. Maybe this is the crew that already has those skills, but I wasn't, and that was intimidating to me. So I was glad I took those steps.
There was a great book from my brother who actually was making graphics on determining how to what rapid is. And the whole point of that thing is basically the quickest, shortest distance between your brain and an idea really through your hand. This kind of stuff is great. It can be awesome at coding or diagramming coding or whatever, but it's you're going to get your ideas out faster. And iterate a lot. Just that design studio for 2 hours. Trying a bunch of stuff without just going for quantity at first and just being able to really speed that stuff out.
What was the name of the book?
Rapid Viz.
Yeah, there's a bunch of great kind of, whether it's, some techniques within sketchnoting or sketchboarding, or there's a bunch of, maybe, search on some sketchbooks. I found those to be pretty helpful. I can tweet out some of the ones that I looked up this year.
Do any of you have thoughts on the overlap between user experience design and business analysis?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll hear from all of you. We have time.
My understanding of business analysis is probably not as strong as a business analyst's sense of what they do. But I've done a great deal of thinking on that matter, at least previously. So if you think about some of the things that people have said, being able to understand where business is going, as an example, what story they're trying to tell, where they want to go, I can see business analysts really looking forward and trending in such an industry with the people they're trying to serve, like the audience at large, and working in the overlap in that space with researchers and a UX department or UX group to say, here's what we need to understand, how we can deliver a solution that's providing value, future-facing, not just reacting to problems and usability problems or transactional problems or things like that. And I also think that more traditional in the sense of that role, just as I understand it, obviously the business requirements and understanding those things, there's a partnership to be had there, if not the same person, whether or not they live under the umbrella of UX or not, isn't for me to say, but I certainly see overlap.
Yeah, so I've had that role, business analyst, I think, what year, I don't know, probably around 2000, maybe 1999 or so, but that was during a time in which consulting companies were hiring people as business analysts. They didn't really know, they weren't ready to call them information architects, right? And even when we were called information architects, we weren't allowed to be sold as an information architect because people didn't know what that meant, right? And they didn't know what they were getting. So I think there's a huge overlap. I used to say when I was hiring for IA teams, one of the things I would ask, and this was probably 6 years ago, was on the spectrum of kind of what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, we often have people that often came from the BA side. And if they were visual thinkers and clear communicators and really curious, they could often transition pretty quickly into an IA role. And I know you know pretty well about that kind of overlap. So I think there's a ton of overlap. I think it comes from what's interesting to you and what drives you, how visual you are, how cued in are you to kind of user needs. But I think there's a ton of overlap. And when a UX person or a visual person is paired up with a really strong VA, like amazing things happen. But I think often that partnership, and I know it depends on how your organization's organized, sometimes PAs are aligned with technology and UX is aligned with other parts of the org. I think kind of figuring out, well, we all know certain things just need to happen to get a good product made. Let's figure out what the VA is going to provide, what the UX person is going to provide, and we'll kind of have a happy marriage.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Having served as a VA, and always had VAs on my teams in the past, VAs have a usually very practiced way of getting at requirements and documenting requirements. And especially on very complex technical projects, again, more the UX on a very complex technical side, like the UI on an enterprise CMS or something like that, where there's a lot of moving parts and it's about people, but it's also about what the technology can do. VA is a nice, is a nice transition into that world. And I think that just like Nicole said, it's like if you have that ability to go beyond the quantifying of the requirements and then how would those be visualized and what do they mean overall, it's a natural path. And there's that technical aptitude. And again, I think it goes back to the organization. If you're working in a marketing agency, probably not as much needed than the VA. If you're working on Sitecore, Sitecore project, then yes, that's where VA UX emphasis would be.
Yeah, I guess my experience with VAs has been, I've never served as a VA, but the times that I've worked with them, I mean, there's so much overlap in what we're doing that a lot of times we come up with a design, we write the annotations out, we copy them as far as getting the functional requirements in for.
There can be tremendous overlap.
Right.
If you're not in a partnership situation, it can be really frustrating because you feel like it's just someone's copying or pasting each other's work, and that's really frustrating. To illustrate, I mean, this in the past few months actually I had a perfect collaboration with the VA, and I had to kind of stop the whole room and say, this is how I wish we would work all the time. But we had a design, we had an intent and some data we wanted to show on the UI, the interface, but we didn't know if that data was even available, and if we could even find it and kind of calculate everything together and bring it together. And instead of writing requirements, we want this to do this, and eventually we'll write all the determine it works out. Like we sat down, the VA sat down, and it's a very technical VA. He dug into the data tables, pulled it out, did some queries, and was like, you mean like this? I was like, absolutely, great, now I have this, I can put on my screen, like perfect marriage, right? Like we communicated design intent, he figured out if it could actually be done and pulled back that way. And I was like, and that was a great moment. For me, I was like, I would love to not ever have to sit down and like argue over who writes requirements. But
I've had a similar experience with one VA that's just like this guy, and luckily it's an ongoing thing, so it's really cool that anybody else is. He has that sensibility, he has some software background, so same thing. He's still going to reality check and go, this is what really kind of he's actually good. Yeah, it's let that roll. I'm guessing we have some students out there.
The question I have is, where should people who want to learn more about UX look for training or education? Because especially interaction design is something we're relatively new.
There's oodles of blogs, there's oodles of people talking about it. And in fact, it just was a non-con, someone did a journey mapping, a presentation of journey mapping, and I heard she used Pinterest because it's so visual. And I went up there, and surprisingly, there were 27 different UX people up on Pinterest talking about journey mapping do it, which is really interesting. So I think there's a lot of information out there. Obviously, there's a lot of books. There's a lot of folks touting things. So and as far as getting experience, that's always the tough one. I actually think the nursery does a good job of bringing people up and what they do. I think that's the constant challenge. It's like, on the agency side where I'm at, we're moving so fast that when I get to the point where it's like I need to bring in another UX designer, it's like that person has to, hit 100 miles an hour in 4 days. So that gets to be tougher. But finding an organization that is willing to nurture talent, maybe it might not be in UX, it might be content strategy, or it might be taxonomy. I know when Target redid their website, they brought up a lot of people as far as on taxonomy and content analysis and things like that. So finding ways to use your current position to kind of stretch into that, because it's possible. People are always looking for that.
There are certainly formal and informal options. So some of what was mentioned, I think, is just the self-directed effort stuff, reading blogs and books. When I was first, getting started in my UX career, whenever that started, whatever that looked like, I do know that I used Twitter as a great tool for finding resources for people who I felt were good designers, or people I kind of wanted to mimic my knowledge and understanding of the field from. But beyond that, even more formal and semi-formal options. The Nerdy does actually have an apprenticeship program, which they started. A good friend and colleague, Frett of mine, some of you might actually know, runs that program. Beyond that, the International or Information Architecture Institute actually has a formal mentorship program, and you can go on there and find people who are local to you or not, because a lot of those relationships can happen remotely as well. And that's a very hands-on, tactical way of learning, practically applied stuff, outside of a job setting. And then obviously internships and things like that.
Yeah, and I would say, this is kind of how I'm wired, but I would say build stuff, right? Build anything. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just start building something. And if that means if you don't have technical skills to actually build a final product, find someone who's kind of in a similar space, a learning space as you, and maybe partner and do something. I know when I wanted to enter the space, this was like eons ago, and it was a very different point in time, but I offered just to create things for free for a company that was willing to take a chance, and they did. This day and age, you can kind of play around and build a lot. So don't be afraid to build.
And just finding a common related deal of some sort, like some sort of interaction design, like you were mentioning before, just kind of, growing that into user design, user experience design role. That's kind of how I ended up getting into this role as well. There's web design at the beginning, a lot of graphic design, books, and think, this is actually something this company needs a little bit more of. So
I was a copywriter to begin with, so it was, again, it was a different time. I was a copywriter, and we needed someone to start organizing information for this thing called the web. It was like, sure, I want to do that. I didn't know how to do that. It was kind of diving into it. So my company at the time was at a place where that's the sophistication level of the company too. So they were happy to have someone kind of show up and start to do it. And they were willing to allow me to kind of learn as I go. So.
There are some formal programs that started to develop universities and whatnot. Metro State started up in the fall. John and Ed, UXP in the summer. I don't know about you.
Jared School's got this thing going on out there. He's keeping that pretty close to the best.
I was waiting for the unicorn turns to come up.
Yeah.
sell it, I think also like don't be afraid of some of the smaller venues for not that this one becomes they're so expensive. But some of the great local events in which you get to meet some other people that are making spaces you and similar to this, but even some of the smaller local conferences.
Actually, we web conference out there, so there's local conference, I think April. And that's actually, it's cross-disciplinary, so there's everything from just kind of like business analysts and stuff, and all the way through development back in.
And there was a program that I saw, I have to go find the link for it again, but it's like an 8-week user experience intensive course. It's 8 weeks every day. It's like $8,000 or something like that. Basically, it took you through all the various tasks that a user experience person worked through, but I haven't checked it out beyond that. So this program is kind of popping up here and there, so definitely worth checking out.
It's also sort of like a MOOC phenomenon, MOOC, massive online. I took this course in old school that I went to just for fun, and it was free. You get paid the money if you wanted to, but there are courses in human factors, and courses in UX, and from various universities and whatnot. And, if you wanted to get some kind of a certificate from them, you could pay money or just kind of take things for free. I heard something on NPR about this the other day. Some of these schools are pushing back and I get thousands of applicants. And it's like, I can't imagine how great all those people who really evaluate this stuff. But there are all resources moving around.
How much do you guys value formal education, or is it more of that's kind of a tool to build a portfolio?
When you said that, I think my initial reaction is I much more value having tried to do things. Like because it shows to me your level of curiosity, your level of just being able to jump in and try and fail and try again. So for me, that was never, when I was in the hiring position, I never considered that a big selling point, honestly. And that might change, right? Because as programs become more available, that does change.
I personally don't. I mean, if you're referring specifically to like a degree in the UX field, which is very, very few that are directly related to one of them, I don't. And again, full disclosure, if I am looking at hiring somebody, I hardly ever look to where they went to school. Or if I do, it's the last thing I look at. Blind curiosity, to be honest with you, because to Nicole's point, I'm much more interested in the fact that you understand design as it's applied in the way that we do that. And if you can articulate that, it doesn't really matter where you got that language.
And I think the places that interview well, it's not even so much about the work that you show, because I think a lot of times when you show work, it's difficult for the interviewer to kind of process whether it's a good solution or not, just right at that moment, because they don't really know what the problem is. But actually, I think the interviewer does, they just give you a little UX test, you go home, solve that problem in some way, and take a look at it, because they have a good understanding of what that problem is that they're setting out to you, and so they can evaluate that solution a lot better. Not everybody does it like that, though, so, I'm kind of in this situation.
And I've come across other companies that do a similar thing. They basically, they pose a challenge and ask you to kind of solve that challenge. But the core point, I think, that to be made there, can certainly allude to is articulating the problem was that you were solving. So showing someone a sketch or a wireframe or a prototype, it could be beautiful, it could be the most polished thing any of us has ever seen. But I have no idea whether or not it's solving that problem. So in that context of being able to talk about your skills, really work on your storytelling, say, well, here's where this started. I'm showing you this thing, but I'm talking to you the history on why this is even relevant as a means for you to judge whether or not solve the problem.
Case study maybe, or?
I would actually say it's even a little bit more than a case study. It's not just saying somebody came to us and asked us to do this, and this was the result. Just like a typical case study format. I'm interested in saying something somebody said this was their problem. You determined that that wasn't the full problem, and it also required this. And you made a decision somehow how you're going to solve that problem. Here are things along the way that allow me to see how you approach solving that problem. And those tend to be design artifacts like a prototype or site map or sketches or whatever it is.
Back to the education question, one thing I would say is if you do have that in your background, you know, to the point is figure out a way to tell that story to make that into something that is a leverageable point for you in the interview. Yes, I came from this, I learned this, I lived and breathed this, I have an degree in it. And if you don't have it, it's the same thing. As again, my degrees were in English literature, you know. So it's like, how does that have to do with UX? Well, I would go in and start talking about if I was writing you right now, is that I know how to tell a story. I know how to look at an audience, I know how to just dissect an audience, and I know how to tell a story. Obviously, I'm going to have to prove that out in a visual format of UX and whatnot, but take whatever angle, and if you look at that backup to the graphic out there, that's such a wide spectrum of qualities and qualifications. There's no way one person can do all that. So it's kind of like pick your parts and what you're good at and use that as your story when you come in. Because again, as a hire, someone who's hiring, I'm looking at anywhere from 5 to 30 resumes, and so it's going to be up to you to designate yourself to me, not me to drag it out of you. That's what I would, that's how I would go into the interviews and kind of making that opportunity and showing, yes, I can do this. It's going to find you.
Who wants to comment on the future? Any visions of how you see UX changing with roles, with technology? Any thoughts?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to, oh boy, the future, this is always a tough one. I mean, I think it's going to continue to fracture. And the reason why I say that is like, I'm not saying screens are going to keep getting smaller. It's like, it's going to go in other directions, but someone mentioned the Internet of Things. It's like, I'm working with a client right now that the UI is sitting on a device, sitting in a boiler room that a contractor looks at. When you talk about that blue-collar guy who maybe has a high school or GED education, who's now got to interact with this technology, that's a whole other level of UX. And to be able to, we saw it, going from very complex experiences in 2005 when phones came along and smartphones and screens got small and things started to simplify again. And now this is a whole other level, or even like fitness tracking and smartwatches and whatnot. It's like you got to be able to do one thing and one thing well. That's a whole other level of UX that I think is intriguing for the future. And I guarantee you I'll be wrong in 6 months. So.
Well, I think it's curious, right? Like this whole little things, you saw, you've seen this specialization, and now I would say, I'm curious if you're going to see more specialization, or if you're starting to see, actually you have people, and I would say I'm in that camp, who are going back out into not being so specialized. And partly that's because of this situation where there's so many things. You can't possibly be attached to I'm a mobile UI person, because in 6 months you better be ready to be someone else. I'm curious if you're going to see people asked to be wearing more hats. And of course there's a debate about how technical you have to be, whether you need some development skills, and we can talk about that. So I would say, what I would love the future to look like is that, where I sit today is I don't necessarily want to be really specialized. I want to be where I'm able to be curious and learn and pivot to what's asked of me. Whether I'm handed a product design problem or a mobile design problem or a TV design problem, I want to be able to quickly adapt and apply those skills. And I think that's what's starting to be asked of people, because I think it's somewhat unreasonable to think that you have all these specialists to cover everything.
I think actually that's kind of why I got into script in the first place. I think as a designer, I felt like a lot of the decisions were already being made for me by the time I was asked to design something. It's like, oh, that interface is already established, the strategy behind the product was established, and getting into that user experience role allowed me to get into the conversation earlier so that influence some of those things, because you find that somebody's decision made a long time ago actually affects the experience of this product, and by the time you get it, you can't do anything about it. And so that's actually what I'd like to see more of, is UX just kind of integrated more into organizations as a whole, so not just, mobile development.
That's actually where my response to that question would come from. So I think everything that we're kind of thinking about right now is how our roles would change for ourselves. And my answer is much more, so in short, two things. I think UX is going to take on a larger role in businesses, period, in actual business decisions. And then by default, the second thing that will happen there is I think we're going to be held accountable to bottom line success. Now that doesn't necessarily mean moving the number of profit or whatever the case may be, but I think we're going to be held accountable to that a lot more. Why I say that is that I'm even starting to see a lot more requests on what's the ROI of the work that we're doing in user experience design. That speaks to me of a larger part of businesses and where this is going to sit. So organizationally speaking, it's getting higher up the chain to C-level people. We're seeing roles like chief experience officer. We're hearing terms like customer experience isn't just customer service, instead of just user experience. These words have meaning. I think people are starting to understand that design thinking can be applied to business problems, not just design.
It's interesting you mentioned the ROI things. I think that's one way that I'm trying to sell, the case for UX in the first place. Again, well done and start development driven, waterfall, long projects and things like that. So, I've had to fight a lot of times to say, well, it's really taking the time to ask these extra questions up front, draw the extra pictures, and bounce a few ideas back off. Ask the extra questions rather than just throwing it directly, to the VA or the wall to the developers. And so, I think that's interesting. Yeah, once you try to make that case that there is an ROI, you can actually be responsible for it too. You can be accountable to it. But, for me over the years, again, it's just been kind of refreshing. Lately here, I'm higher up. I go to these town hall meetings and things like that. And we're a very, very large organization. It does seem to be coming more and more down to the top. So at least they get the message out there. Again, how much they really understand, I'm not sure, but I'm hopeful for that. I'm getting a couple of questions.
Well, and I'm just going to follow up more on that, though, is that I think also the realm of UX is I think the exciting opportunity is there's a variety of different ways you can apply it. It's like if you want to go into Salesforce training, there's UX applications there as far as how you empower a Salesforce to use tablets and applications and whatnot. So there's there's UX and HR and training in-house now, and how training is being done, electronic training in organizations. There's just so many where before it was like, oh, UX, you must work on websites. You could be in a variety of different disciplines in applying UX principles and what we do on a day-to-day basis, and I think that's really exciting.
For those of you specifically who said that you were in strategy and research, how do you move from analysis to synthesis? So is it something that's inherent in a person, or is it something that can be learned?
Join us next time at IxDA on that topic. That's a fantastic question. I don't think it's one we can answer right now. To distill it in just in a few sentences, there's designing from raw data output is very dangerous, right? So as an example, when you run a survey, maybe do some interviews, and you get responses. I highly discourage reacting and creating a design off of that, because data should turn into meaning, right? And synthesis is where you do that. In short, if any of you guys have read anything from John Cole, he talks about it this way. He basically says you get raw data. You as a human being have experiences on this earth, right? You apply your worldview to that data, that somehow creates insights and meaning. And you should use that to inform your designs, but it's a very, very dangerous thing to run a survey and say, well, we have statistical significance, and 10,000 people fill it out, so we should do that thing, we should design that thing. It's incredibly dangerous, but there's a lot of understanding that happens between data and design.
Maybe an example of that I had was I was working on a project once where there's a function that the developer designed. You could select an object with one tool, but then you could select multiple objects with another tool, and they would track how many times these tools were being used. And people were just using the single selection tool 95% of the time, and the multiple selection tool the other 5. And so his conclusion was that nobody wanted to select multiple objects. But then when you look at the interface, well, that button is hidden off somewhere where you can find it. And so what's the actual cause of that problem? You know, you have to go beyond the data.
The danger of statistics is 100% of people who drink water will die. So you should drink water, right? And that's kind of what you're describing. That's one of the reasons, an extreme one, obviously, why it's very dangerous to just design for raw data.
I mean, and then the crux of the question is, so how do you learn how to synthesize? I think I don't know, I think it comes with practice, I think it comes with failing, and I think it comes with getting experience, because I think that gets to that piece of intuition of, wait a minute, this raw data, we're missing something, we're getting this one edge, how do we ask the questions to get it right? And so, you know, I think it can be taught, I suppose, but I think it's more about experiencing it. I don't know. I imagine we all have this, but I can certainly say there's been some big mistakes in my past that I learned a lot from. And I don't know. The strategy is as much, in my experience, intuition is it's being able to ask the hidden question as much as it is, you know, that survey data. So,
I think looking at your skills of just identifying patterns, and that's something that designers do too. You know, learning how to tease out patterns in different ways. Sometimes that's, you know, flipping everything on its head and looking at it a different way. But that's a skill that throughout UX and research strategy, that's right. How do you find patterns?
There's one such tease me out a little bit, I guess. Further say, a lot of what I think everybody is talking about UX design is essentially problem solving. So some data can tell you what the problem is, but not necessarily why it's a problem, and that's just as important. And then even further, there's additional research that can be done to help you understand how to solve that problem, right? So, as an example, we'll talk about some of those things. Just knowing what the problem is doesn't necessarily guarantee solving some solution. So think about it that way as well. Yes, I can feel confident that I've identified what needs design, but I don't necessarily know why. So like what steps do you take to get there? Recommendations that I make to people when looking at this stuff, and even crafting what they're going to learn through research is, what do you need to know to create this design? I don't necessarily mean even in terms of layout, but just what's somebody going to find valuable, and how do you ascertain that information?
Yeah, no, I think the last thing I would say is, you know, especially in a few of my previous roles, I would look at, you know, research isn't just this quick thing you do at the beginning to understand, and then you've got all the answers and you're done building, right? And thinking of it very iteratively, what do I need to know at this point in time to feel confident to move to the next stage of my design, right? How do I know I'm in the right ballpark? How do you make sure that you're coming back in that iterative cycle with different types of research? So, you know, whether it's quantitative or qualitative or in-field or whatnot, making sure you're getting the right mix to learn whatever it is you need to do to feel confident to move next. And it's not done.
But I would say, you know, try a solution. Don't be afraid to just put it out there and see. You know, that's not going to be the case in every project that you work on. Sometimes just the way the project is, you kind of you only have one shot at it, and that's what you end up with. But another time, you can try something. If it doesn't work out quite right, try something different.
Let's move back in one, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering to see like if you guys had an example of you think is sort of like doing it right, you know, sort of, I don't know if it's your own clients or your own company or anything like that, that you had a brief and you solved that issue and it's like that, you know. If I'm doing, you know, as a recruiter, I'm always trying to show examples of good UX and UI and stuff like that, you know. Do you guys have examples of that? Because all I'm using right now is basically IxDA.com and mobile and, you know, a website, you know, as my example.
Difficult question. I think you're going to get a lot of the similar answers, and ones that are really easy. Companies like Apple, companies like Disney, because the experiences they're providing are complementary in different ways, and it's contextually relevant.
application and one's trying to be solved. It's like Uber, everyone's talking about Uber because it does a very simple thing very well. But it's not ESPN.com, it's a really different problem. So, you know, it's kind of relevant, you know, it's relevant to, you know, what is the discussion on what's the best example for, you know, crowdsourcing, I don't know, or what's the best example for, you know, content aggregation. You know, developers have to be looking at things like that versus what's good. That's hard. Again, there's if you search it, there's the Webby Awards were just out into 2013 as far as, and now they have an entire UX category that's best practices, best mobile app. There's like 5 or 6 subcategories of UX now within Webbies. And so that can give you some things that have conversations around from a design perspective. Is it FWA is a great site, they have their site of the day. Whether they're good UX, I'm not going to say that, but they're interesting design sites. You know, so there's a lot of resources out there where you can, you know, grab a portfolio of what looks good to you and you know, came at different issues in different ways.
That's interesting, that makes.
Yeah, I mean, we could, like, the list could be really varied, right? I mean, I could say Zappos, right? I love Zappos. You could say, oh, is their product detail page the best? I don't know, but you know what? I'm thrilled when I purchase something from there. I'm thrilled that returns are easy and I'm always getting what I want. And so it's not just about, like, is the design or seeing the UI or whatever, it's the experience, right? It's the package I get with an easy label and the whole deal. So, yeah, the list could be really varied.
I was interested as the site itself, which is a good example.
Yeah.
The users on there, there are users who are bookmarking things. It's such a great resource for finding great examples. In fact, one user named Timoa, TMOA, has nothing but UX examples across all these different settings and categories. Correct.
Just thinking about the discipline of UX and all the different roles and responsibilities and skills that you guys have talked about tonight. You know, we talked about BA as being kind of a trade that overlaps a lot with UX. You know, development, Robert thinks about UX and all development that he does. I'd love to hear what you guys' thoughts on content strategy and all that. It's in content strategy, copywriting, and content creation.
It is good. It is. It's one and the same. Every experience you deliver has a message. Call it intent, call it message, call it copywriting. That needs to be considered as part of the experience. Nicole talks about Zappos. Well, there's content even on the physical part of that experience that she has. Someone should think about that because it shouldn't be the same content you see product until they right?
Yeah, I see it as another specialization, and you know, needed, you know, depending on the application or the site. I mean, it's always needed, but there's even places in which people need that specialization. So large content demanding sites may need a dedicated content strategy team. So I guess I just see it as similar in that way. But again, like the same sort of partnerships, right? I've had an experience where it's tricky to know what is the content strategist providing and what am I providing. And so you kind of have, again, those ground rules or just a game plan for, okay, we all know that we need to do X, Y, and Z to produce something well. Like, what do you do? What am I doing?
And I think there's the same thing. I think content strategy is integral from the standpoint of creating something from scratch. Knowing that story, knowing what that story arc is, the UX is what are the bells and, you know, at least from my standpoint, you start with the story to know what kind of bells and whistles and what kind of UI you're going to organize around or design around the story. From a standpoint of creating something or redesigning something or relaunching something, you need to know. It's like you can do you know, UX in a vacuum and come up with great pages and whatnot. If you're going to populate them with crap content, your experience fails. So if you don't know what your gaps are, and you know, in my case, if we're not able to go back to the clients and say we don't have what we need to work with, then we're just going to fail because you're just putting crap after crap. So content is absolutely integral.
Yeah, so whether that looks like that's a completely separate role or just something that you take on, it just depends on the situation that you're in.
It comes down to the size of the teams, definitely. Aren't always has. So this is kind of going back.
That's what's a UX ROI? How do you guide it?
So the question is about UX ROI, whether you KPIs, key performance indicators?
The biggest one I've heard about, been asked about as a practitioner in the field is engagement. The trick there is that everybody defines engagement in a different way. And a lot of times, so let's just face it, a lot of the stuff that we do is digital. It's on the screen, it's probably a website. So there are analytics tied to that. And so often I think people really want to hang their hat on some analytics to define engagement. Things like page views, things like bounce rate, things like time on site, whatever, they'll try to translate that into engagement. I don't think it's a fool's errand, but it's incomplete. So if you think about what and then why, kind of like we were talking about before. So that's what's happening on your digital property, but we don't necessarily know why. Bounce rate might be really low, but it doesn't mean people engage. Maybe it's really freaking hard for them to find what they're looking for, so they just keep going, round and round, wherever the case may be. Yeah, so I think there's some more, since Nicole brought up the qualitative understanding, you need to bring to those. They're indicators, but they're not the full understanding.
In a different work environment as well, like currently I'm consulting for just a business making their own products, and prior to me going in there, it would be product people telling the developers what they want. To try to put something together, and they would bring it back to the product people, and like, well, this is not what we wanted. UX person goes in, designs something that gets a little bit of sign off first, development